Just look at the total amount of sleep. Try and be consistent. If the wearable shows you this, when you go to bed and when you wake up 7 days a week, that goes a long ways towards health.
Chuck, welcome to Ultrahabits, man. It's great to have you on the show. It's about 7 a.m. here in Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah, well, it's, I guess you'd call it 1500 here in Vermont, in the U.S.
And I can see your cat in the back doing his thing on the treadmill. That's what I feel like in life sometimes.
That's right.
It's kind of, he's moving his legs. For those of you that will watch the YouTube video, the cat's kind of attempting to have an exercise, but it's not really. It's kind of like, I don't really like this.
They sometimes sprint on the treadmill. Some of the cats do, at least.
Oh, do they?
Yes.
Do they? So Vermont, that's interesting. I didn't know you were in Vermont. My buddy Joe DeSena's there. Have you ever been out to his farm?
Yes, I should have worn my hat. I've got one of his hats from one of his races. He puts on even before Spartan, he put on some of the most crazy 50-milers that you would just kill you, break your soul.
He's invited my son and myself to his farm in June next year, so my son can do the Spartan Kids and I can do the death race. I don't know if I'm going to make it, but I'd love to. Yeah. I'm actually on our podcast is airing next week on the 28th, so we had a really good chat on his podcast. So he's definitely been an influence for me and someone that we love on the show. But yeah, welcome, Chuck. So you and I connected originally from our mutual friend Charlie Engel. You know, yes. I had Charlie on the show, and Charlie's always a wheeler and dealer. He's like, man, you got to meet this guy. You know, Chuck, he's always in the middle of something, right?
Right.
And he's just an amazing. He's such a good storyteller, and he's so good at kind of hyping a situation up. And I was like, yeah, for sure. And he introduced you to me as, someone that is an expert in wearable technology, but somebody that was looking at using wearable technology and the data, particularly with him, for things that were maybe non-conventional. So Charlie said to me that, because, we're both in recovery, we're both in Alcoholics Anonymous and recovering addicts, that, through wearable technology, there was this potential to be able to start to track people coming out of rehabs and start to understand their biology in a way that could lead us to know when they were in trouble. And I found that super interesting. And that's kind of the flavor of the conversation I wanted to have with you today. I think we all know that the application for athletes, cool, and I think we can discuss that. But where is wearable technology going, Chuck, in areas like what, Charlie was talking about? And is that something that is real?
Yeah, I mean, just to back up a little bit, I mean, it's, the wearables have come a long way from one of the first companies, Polar, for athletes had, watches, you put on a heart strap, foot pod to track your mileage. And I was thinking about that because it's interesting to see how quickly things have evolved. Like, for instance, I remember in 2007, I heard about this Simon guy from the UK developed a company called Ithlete, and it used a little transceiver or broadcasting thing, I guess a transceiver that was coded to Polar chest straps back in the day in 2007, which seems like a long time ago, right? And that was the first thing I tested that you could actually, see where your recovery was. And so, you fast forward through like the Whoop band that came out around 2013, 2014, the Oura Ring, now Garmin, Polar, everybody is tracking heart rate variability. And so that metric caught a lot of attention from people, like Charlie, for instance, for addicts, trying to recover, because it's one of the few metrics that can actually show if somebody's struggling with stress, from whatever it is. Could be mental, could be physical, or anything like that. And so we started talking about using whatever wearable we wanted to use that could track that. So if you got a baseline for somebody when they're in a treatment center, when they come out, you could follow that and see the trending. And if it was going down pretty quickly, the trends, you might want to reach out to somebody and say, hey, do you want to talk? or something like that. So that's where we were kind of heading with that. But there are, for most of the wearables, there are a lot more sensors coming out that could make that even a better thing to look at. So some of the wearables now have sensors on them that actually look at the sweat coming off your skin. And so with those, you actually get a direct measurement about, how somebody's doing, like mentally or, distress in general. So from using these things and looking at trends, you can actually see if somebody's, adapting to the stress they have in life. If they're not adapting and they're an addict, are they going to relapse because they can't deal with the stress? So what's their normal thing they would do is they'd reach for, beer or their drug of choice, and they relapse. And that's what happens to most people coming out of treatment centers. They relapse. I think Charlie told me, like, I don't know, 25%, 95% of people relapse.
Yeah. The statistics are pretty shit, Chuck, in terms of long-term sobriety. And it's funny because I live in the mountains here in Melbourne, and there's 3 rehabs around my house. They're all the same rehab, but they have 3 different facilities. They're very beautiful facilities, and I was actually there yesterday talking with some of the people there, and I had a really good chat with a PT who was there on site, and we were talking about the unique physiology of addicts, particularly people in early recovery, and how much they swing. And I didn't mention to him, it's funny that we're having this conversation today because we were talking about, like, wearables never came up in that discussion, but it was like, well, how do we start to help the addict regulate a bit more? And running for me was a big part of my story, early recovery. Like, I just ran, and very similar to Charlie in that way. So I think what you're talking about is super interesting. Have you found adoption of the product in the market for, like, people in recovery, or is this something that is still an idea, or has it actually been implemented?
It's mostly still in, I guess, pilot phase. There are some clinics, they tend to be the smaller ones here in the U.S., where people can, they don't have to stay there if they don't want. If they have a job, they can go home to their families if they want. And so clinics like that are open to using wearables because people aren't there all the time under supervision. And so, wearable can give you that extra data point. I mean, it's not the end game, but it's a data point that you can at least decide whether you should reach out or not, like a touch point. And you're not usually going to use it to say, hey, we think you're using drugs again, but it's more about, hey, let's just talk. I just want to catch up with you. And they don't know, why you're catching up. Was it the data or something else? Somebody saw you and, reached out to you, kind of thing. But it's just like in normal healthcare. If you go to a doctor once a year, wouldn't you want to have, like, data points in between those visits so you can see how somebody's doing on a protocol, a drug you gave them, lifestyle changes you advised? But, again, nobody thinks about that in healthcare, and nobody's thinking about that in recovery, in the recovery space.
And the reality is, like, you'd learn a lot, like, if someone was wearing the wearable and then all of a sudden they took it off.
Well, yeah.
They relapsed because they like, they're kind of telling on themselves. Like, because, particularly if you're on something like meth or hard drugs, like, if you were monitoring someone's data, you would definitely see the variation.
And that's, and one of the companies that I work with, Heads Up Health, they have, dashboards for, like, clinicians. It's sort of compliance. You can see if somebody actually connected, their weight scale or the wearable you want them to use, like an Oura ring, to track their sleep. And so it's not only just giving the data, but are they using it? Is it, attached to the dashboard? And then you can reach out and say, hey, we noticed you're not wearing your Oura ring. Why? Or you're not using your weight scale, so.
Yeah. Chuck, what's the adaptation been like in corporates, mate? Like, is that something like, because I know that in theory, this sounds good, and I think there's been a lot of talk around, there's, for instance, here in Australia, a guy I know, Craig, who's got a program for founders, startups. Now, they're there by choice, and they wear the Aura ring, and they monitor the data. But that's different because they're there by choice, and they don't feel like Craig and the program, they're monitoring them to kind of drive performance in a sense, like they're working for them, right? The man, so to speak. But I guess my question to you is, I think in theory, like if I was on the board of directors for a firm, I would be very interested in my C-suite being monitored, right? And and as a C-suite person, I could potentially be open to that until I feel like maybe the board is using that, for means to kind of micromanage me. Has adaptation in corporate happened, and is it happening, or are there challenges because of privacy issues and stuff like that?
I think
other
in general, people are worried about privacy. But in the corporate space, I think it's more about they're used to the model of where they count steps, because the people running the programs are like the HR person, and they've already got a full plate in their mind. So that's what they're used to. But if they actually looked at where are the costs for their healthcare that they're paying for, is it coming from? And if they actually look closely at it, they'd probably see it's like 10% of their employees are driving that because they've got chronic illness. And if they actually had like a holistic approach to employee wellness, so it'd be a combination of, maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, do blood labs for every employee. You have an in-office clinic where people can go in to have their niggles looked at. You have wearables as part of the program, so people with challenges about more than steps, like getting actual exercise, like getting your heart rate up, walking fast. How's your sleep? How's your stress level? But they haven't. Most of the corporate wellness programs haven't gotten there. But what you talked about, that's happening in, especially certain verticals, like in the financial space. The C-suite, they are actually going out to companies like Whoop and Aura and buying rings, because they look at it more of like, you guys are the sports team. You need to be at the top of your game when you're trading stocks or whatever. And so we want you to perform like an athlete. And so usually they can do that by, kind of painting it more like a team kind of thing. We're all in this together. We want to produce. We all get the bonus at the end of the year if we hit our milestones. So that is starting to happen in certain verticals, but not in employee wellness in general. It still hasn't happened here in the U.S.
Yeah, I'm contracting in a pretty good firm. I'm currently working with a company and the CEO around some stuff and in sales and whatnot, but they've got a very good internal culture.
Yeah.
They've got houses, so like Hogwarts, and part of the competition within those is steps. And it's funny because everyone assumes because I'm a runner, my steps will be really high, and I'm like, not necessarily, man. I'm a trail runner. I kind of I kind of scuttle.
That's right.
I don't
Same
necessarily
with me.
stride. So
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm trying to keep my impact low, my stride short. So okay, that's interesting. So I want to shift the conversation, Chuck, to more about yourself. So you've lived a life of endurance too, and you've been in this kind of wearables game for a very long time. And before the show started, we talked about some of the stress you've accumulated from being in endurance for so long. Did you see that coming, given that you are into wearables, or was that something that you were able to,
not
grasp on?
exactly. I mean, I didn't talk about it way back, but I mean, I was originally a cyclist. It's the opposite of most people. Runners go to cycling because their knees go bad, right? I did the other thing. I was a long distance cyclist, commuted to work on a bicycle. Then I get into running, not till I really into running till I was in my 40s, and it worked out pretty well. I got, went from small, trail races to ultras pretty quickly. Things were going pretty well, and I did too many marathons and too many ultras. When I was 51, the wheels came off. Like I just had no energy all of a sudden. So I had a friend who was a cardiologist. I was fortunate. And so I went to see him, and he gave me a full workup, and he just wanted to see what made me tick. So he didn't charge me for anything. So he did, cardiac ultrasounds. Oh, I guess that's an echocardiogram. Had me do stress tests while doing all this stuff with ECG on a treadmill for 3 hours, and everything. And he's the first one that told me. He said, from everything you've done over the years, you've actually caused fairly substantial remodeling of your heart, and it's a form of damage, because you're running, well, you're keeping your heart running at a high rate, too often throughout the year, competing, and one chamber gets bigger than the rest, where you're pulling in all the oxygen and blood, and so he told me that you're probably going to end up having AFib. And he told me there are lots of studies out for like endurance rowers where the whole teams ended up in their 50s with AFib after college. One came out of Oxford, like the whole rowing team ended up with AFib.
Can you explain what
Afibrillation
AFib is,
it's
to the
one of
audience?
many signaling issues in the heart where your heartbeat isn't normal, like it's sort of erratic. Like every 10 beats might be erratic. And so like Apple came out in 2000, well, with the Apple Watch 4, where they included ECG on the watch. Most recently this year, they came out with what they call AFib history, where every 15 minutes they use, they actually do a sampling for heart rate variability and see if there's a presence of AFib in the signal. And this is interesting. I'll get back to that in a minute. Tell you something interesting. How somebody without even looking at the ECG can surmise they might have AFib. So anyway, so there are lots of things like watches now. Withings scan watch. You can look at AFib. AliveCore makes all kinds of devices, different models. You can check AFib, but anyway, along the way in my career, one of the companies I worked for was Oura Ring. I was one of the first employees there, and I stayed there through the launch of the Oura Ring 3. And we used to have a lot of users that complained about gaps in their data, like they didn't see heart rate or heart rate variability. And so we look at their data, and it's because it was so much noise in it. And we figured out pretty quickly with the science team that it's likely they had heart rate signaling issues. Now, if you don't take out the bad data like Oura does, and you have a wearable that shows all your whole heart rate and HRV throughout the night, and this is what I started to see that I knew I likely had AFib, and I started testing for it, is you'll see, your heart rate could be just going along here throughout the night, and it goes up like 40 points, and then stays up there for a period of time. And HRV does the same thing. It's like a waterfall. And I start seeing that in patterns on Garmin, like Garmin on my Forerunner 955, and some other wearables that I was able to send their HRV to Apple Health and look at it there. And so I finally had one where I saw that it happened late in the sleep, and it stayed up at the point I woke up. So I happened to have an AliveCore device, so I put it on my knee. It's a well, anyway, you don't have to go in that 6-channel ECG you can buy. And anyway, it said you're in AFib. So I kept testing every hour, and I was in AFib for about 4 hours after I woke up. So anyway, if you see that pattern where the heart rate goes straight up while you're sleeping, where it shouldn't, and stays there for a while, that is likely AFib or something like it.
That's incredible. And we don't hear this dialogue. Like, I've had random people say to me, "Oh, you shouldn't run so much," and I'm like, "Dude, shut up." Like in my head, I'm like writing them off as one of those unhealthy people. But I mean, this kind of shifts the paradigm, right? Like, and maybe it's not in the interest of performance related devices like Garmin to really talk about it, because Garmin is so intrinsically connected to people
Right,
doing
right.
hard
Yeah,
shit. Right? Like, like I don't want to
yeah.
start telling people not to, right? Like, but I mean, being exposed, with your personal situation and being exposed to data for so long, and understanding you're not a doctor, but just anecdotally, like, is there any information out there saying that living a life of endurance, comes a point where it's actually worse than maybe being out of shape? Like,
No,
is there a point where
well,
it's too much?
doing anything for too much is bad, right? It's about balance. But yes, I mean, most of the best ultra runners, the 100-mile people, they tend to disappear pretty quickly. And some of them have actually admitted that they did the equivalent of frying like their nervous system, because they kept their and I'm not a doctor, so I'm not sure exactly what the part of your brain is, but they basically burned out, uh, their ability and to do what they were doing, to be at that high level, and so they have no energy. I mean, they just like burn themselves out, basically, lack of a better term. And you should get somebody on that understands exactly what part of the brain and physiology that wrecks. Um, but it's not like anybody. We shouldn't say that just because run 10 marathons a year, like Ed Wheelock, and I don't think he ever had AFib. Anybody talked about it, but I mean, it's not that you're going to get AFib, but if you are a chronic endurance athlete, you will remodel your heart. There's no way around it. That's just a sort of a byproduct of what you're doing. And it's not a bad thing. I think you're still way healthier, all the research I looked at, than a couch potato will ever be. So, life's longevity, absolutely better for an endurance person across the board. AFib's not the end game. I mean, it's not that you're going to die from it. And I don't think, I haven't gone for a workup yet, but I'm guessing they're going to come back and say, we're not going to treat you with anything like a beta blocker for this. I haven't had, after that incident, I haven't had any more after that. So who knows why it came on.
I was thinking the other day, like, if when you look at races and even marathons, regular road marathons, um, many a times there's actual casualties, like fatalities. You don't hear about it when you're running because they kind of, obviously, they're not going to advertise it. But I mean, I've been in a couple ultras where people have passed
Yeah.
away, as well as just regular road marathons. Do you think that if those individuals were more in tune with their data during training, there could have been some view of
Uh,
potential issues?
That's
Like,
hard to
would that have
say. I mean,
helped? Like, can the
I think
data?
the problem with people, even athletes, and the people that die, that's probably some undiagnosed heart defect or something like that, or there was somebody that had a really bad lifestyle, and late in life they decide to get into running, and they already had blockage in an artery. And again, it's less about the data, but people like that, you know, there may be, they may tell a friend and say, yeah, it's really weird. Like I'm watching TV and, why is my heart rate up around 100 beats per minute? And, like, dude, it shouldn't be that. If you're even reasonably healthy, it should be like in the 40s or 50s, even if you're not a hardcore athlete. But I think the problem is a lot of people, even if they're athletic, like myself, you believe like, nothing's ever going to happen to me because I've never smoked, I eat healthy, and I exercise a lot, right? What could possibly go wrong? Well, I started getting headaches. I'll tell you what can go wrong. When I turned 60 years old, and my wife finally said, go to the doctor, and I did, and they tested my blood pressure. I'd never test other than for 100 milers where they test your blood pressure, and it's high anyway. And I was in like severe hypertension. So I've got high blood pressure, so I'm on drugs for that. So there you go, eating healthy and exercise. And But anyway, so I test my own blood, run my own blood labs a lot, and I've kind of noticed this one blood marker called APOB, which is they found now is one of the better indicators of if you're going to have blockage in your arteries, right? And that's when the lights go out, like the runner, right, where you die at the finish line. And so it's trending in the wrong direction. So I told my doctor, put me on a statin. As much as I hate statins, I got to get that number down because I don't want to have the lights go out at the end of a race. So.
Chuck, do you know Gil?
Yes.
Lander?
Yeah.
You know Gil, yeah?
Yeah.
He was my second guest on the show when we started a few years ago. So your data and information, or that, how does that interact? So just for the audience, Gil was our guest on season 1, second episode, and I call him Dr. Blood, Vlad, because he effectively measures your blood, right, for biomarkers. And so how does the wearables interact with someone like his
it's just part of the picture, right? I mean, because if you just look at one blood marker in a vacuum, that doesn't really necessarily tell you a lot. You need to look at the big picture. And I mean, even like APOB, there might be some other things you want to look at, like triglycerides. It depends who you talk to. Like Peter Attia, he has the things he likes to look at. Different doctors look at different combinations of markers. And like even when I went for the hypertension workup with a cardiologist at the local hospital up here, in New Hampshire, we're in the New Hampshire border, even though she had tested for APOB on my blood panel, she didn't mention it during the consult. She was just hammering me on my total cholesterol. And I said, yeah, it's high, but I said, I can lower that 100 points in 6 months through a couple of easy things. She said, no, you can't. And I said, I'll do it. But if she had lectured me on the APOB and said, I want you to go on a statin, I probably would have said, fine. But she never did. She said, I want to put you on a statin because your total cholesterol is 310. And I'm like, no. And she wouldn't, So anyway, I went on berberine, and I have to be one of those people that takes berberine. It lowered my total cholesterol 100 points, and I sent it to her. And she said, how'd you do that? I said, berberine. I got it off Amazon. It's over the counter.
Chuck, you're funny.
Yeah.
What an OG.
But anyway, so the thing is,
it's interesting. So
data, again, people are, even if you don't have data, if you feel like your heart's racing a lot, right? Or you look in the mirror and your face is flush all the time, there's probably something going on. So go get a blood test. Or if you've got a wearable and your heart rate's elevated all the time, or you've got markers that change dramatically really quickly, go to see a doctor. I mean, there are hundreds of studies, probably thousands, millions now, even with Fitbits, which I hate for accuracy issues. But you see story after stories over the years where somebody had a wearable and they've been literally sitting at an office or a bench and said, my God, my heart rate's over 100. And even if the wearable's not terribly accurate, it's probably reasonably accurate. They've gone to the hospital and they've been told, thank God, you're ready to have a heart attack. And again, if the blood's not pumping into your heart, what do you think happens? Your heart rate goes up. You start feeling weird. But a lot of people are incognizant. So if you've got the data and you think it looks weird, go to the doctor. Call an ambulance. So.
Chuck, back to athletes. This is a subjective question, just pulling out and looking high level. Would you say that access to data has improved performance across endurance?
I mean, if you look at the top athletes and listen to them talk about how they train and when they race, it's like some of these, like Kilian Jornet. I mean, he's the best of the best. And he wears a no chest strap, wears a Coros Pace on Hard Rock and I think UTMB. And I think he would acknowledge that the heart rate on those things sucks off the wrist. But he trains and races, and a lot of them, like people like him, based on RPE. what's his perceived exertion, because he knows his body. And these top athletes like that, they know their bodies. They don't have to look at a watch and tell them what their heart rate is. And they know how to pace.
Yeah.
If they're winning 100 milers, they know exactly how to pace. I mean, it depends on the sport. I guess in the Tour de France type, the high-end cyclists, they've got, sensors, power meters connected to radios that go to the cars, and doctors and performance people yapping in their ears, in the peloton, who's going to be the breakaway. Yeah, so they got all the data. Crazy. Is it good? I don't know. I mean, there's some stuff like I just started testing the core temperature sensor that comes from GreenTag. I think that's actually pretty interesting because I know I've been in mountain races in the summer here in Vermont where inevitably you run out of water on the second time up the friggin' mountain. And, the heat is, it's usually unbelievable. And you wonder why your performance goes to hell. You should jump in a brook because, your body's overheating. And the core temperature sensor can tell you that to verify it. But again, your body knows it. You don't need any data to tell you that.
Yeah. It's funny when the seasons change and I'm running in the heat and I've been running in the cold. My mind will I'll start being like, why is my performance it never just rains on me that
right.
Yeah, dude, it's 100 degrees or we're Celsius, but I'll start thinking, wow, I'm really unfit. 2 weeks ago I was super fit. It's okay, well, it's super hot, right? The heat just doesn't even come to
so data is interesting, but again, people say, Jesus, how many wearables do you wear a day? And I'm like, too many. Do you look at the data? I'm like, not really. I do it to test them, but the data to me, Garmin, if it said, the new metrics Garmin came out with, training readiness, who gives a rat's ass? I know how sore I am, for running up the mountain the other day. I'm not doing repeats today that you want me to do.
Yeah. And if an ultra athlete actually paid attention to their Garmin, they wouldn't be training like they had to anyway. I mean, the reality is the rest will tell you to wait 48 hours.
Well, yeah, and I don't. Have you ever had Jason Coop on from Train Right? You should.
No, I thought about actually getting him as a coach when I was running back in the day, but yeah, I should get him.
No,
he's in
Marin
County,
Colorado.
Right? In the Bay Area.
Yeah, so Mountain Time. But anyway,
Colorado,
you should have him on because, he's a wonderful guy. I met him when he was following Dean Karnazes around, whatever his name is, in his 50 marathons in 50 days. So I talked to him when he was doing that.
I think he also might have been involved with Iron Cowboy.
Yeah, that was BioStrap, and there's a data scientist out of Europe that was working on that project with the Iron Cowboy. Yeah.
What a maniac. So what we'll do, Chuck, is we'll land the plane here, but we always kind of end on habits or things that our audience could implement. Let's just say for the average, what we call in Australia, the punter, the regular average Joe, and they buy a wearable and they're now becoming when people do, when they get gear, they're all into it. And we just want these people to calm down a little bit. What are some basic things that you would recommend around how to actually just use the wearable with some common sense?
the one thing that drives me nuts is people inevitably they get a device that tracks sleep, and they're like, I don't get enough deep sleep. And I always tell them, don't focus on sleep stages. One, they're not very accurate, the wearables, and reading those. But sleep stages were artificially created. They're not based on science, and that's another topic for another day. But anyway, just look at the total amount of sleep. Try and be consistent. If the wearable shows you this, a lot of them do now in graphs over time. When you go to bed and when you wake up 7 days a week, that goes a long ways towards health. Sleep's important. Get 7 to 9 hours for an otherwise healthy adult per night. That's the starting point. Nail your sleep down, and the wearable hopefully can help you do that. Other than that, during the day, in the week, just here in the U.S., the CDC says to have 150 active minutes per week. That's getting brisk walking or above, and accumulate that. That's a great target. If you can move that much, do it. You don't have to be an athlete, a runner, or a swimmer, anything. Just go out there and walk the dog after dinner, briskly for an hour every night.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's excellent, Chuck. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Well, no problem, and it was fun. Thank you.